All right. Well, Hythloday, I see you had a big old little hissy fit. Here's the thing. I think you're flaky. You think you have these rules. You don't actually follow those rules. This is an example of how careful and pedantic you are, that I'm flaky because I believe this idea that I've described to you in every concrete way. You think that it's crazy. I think your ideas about science are crazy, right? They question the wrong thing. And the point is, what are you even saying? You're saying that there is no that nobody's ever done that research. I'm gonna have to read a paper closely and then say this one's worth reading closely. I sent you a quantum erasure experiment that was done as a setup so that students could reproduce it. You didn't. I guess you didn't notice that. Whereas okay, and this agreement, you don't want to go way down the road and then find out we didn't really agree. Hey, we already know we don't agree. We're discussing many things we don't agree with and on, like this distinction. I remember we're supposed to have our own. You were lecturing me at one point about how we're supposed to be able to have two kinds of definition and understand. Do you agree by my definition, blah, 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 and do I agree by your definition, blah, blah, blah? But you don't give a damn, actually, about my definition because it's airy-fairy, and yet, of course, you know what I mean, even though it's airy-fairy. And no, it's an epistemological system that starts in a particular way. And since you don't like it, you have to act like it's flaky and all this stuff because you can't handle that we already know the disagreement. Don't go 5 videos down the road to find out we have a disagreement. We're already aware of some of the disagreements. We already know. And where does I come from in this? The same place as space and whatnot. This concept of an individual observer, and I said this already, Mr. Notices every single thing, supposedly. I don't think so. You don't get why I was talking about the circle definition. It was important to the conversation. It's sad for you that you missed it. Right? Are you just stubborn and won't look at it, or is it just incomprehensible to you? You don't know. It's fairy and flaky. You don't have to think about that. You don't have to think about evidence either, right? Because once you got the idea, that's what you think. Correct? That's what you said. Or no? Would you like to change your position? Okay, I don't think I probably am going to continue this conversation, because if I have to lecture people, I'll just lecture the video. I don't need a conversation with someone who doesn't understand. There's going to be more than one perspective. We're going to find out what they are and then compare them. And you're the one that starts off with your hairy-fairy stuff. Well, this conversation, you brought in consciousness, I brought in consciousness because we've been talking about that, but it was about, existence. And I gave a pretty straightforward definition of what I think should be said to exist, and that everything else I said about it that you've memorized so well. But then if you've memorized it so well, how the hell could you think it's compatible in any way with your position? And as far as I'm concerned, Gary's been complaining about the two-slit experiment and that it was never really done, and never really done with one foot, and never done, and now you want to say the which way, whatever. I may or may not bother to go hunt down a particular one that I can point to you so you can go through it and say, oh, but they didn't do this, or oh, but they didn't do that. That's why I was showing you how to Google. Hint, Google. Let me Google that for you. Oh, it's impossible to find. So maybe I'll tell you a trick. You said it was so impossible. I don't think so. I already sent you an experiment that has at least photos of the data that they did for students to reproduce, a quantum erasure experiment. And there's just so many. It'd be a slam dunk for me. No, because I point out many factual things and I get called hairy-fairy for it. So you could go your own Google search, okay? And I may or may not. I've done a little searching and already showed you one. But that was 10 whole minutes. I don't know if I'm going to do that again, because who really gives a damn? You call me some hairy-fairy for my ideas, and fucking you're making hour-long video too that go off on whatever things, and then I answer your points and you're like, what was that about? Okay, you just get easily confused and bothered, and you call me hairy-fairy and flaky, and I wouldn't even want to know someone like you, except for it's just like flat earth. And then you don't understand why I say, well, your rejection of the peer review process is like flat earth. Oh, now you're up in arms about it. Well, tough shit, but I'm not really interested. I think you should go to the next level of maturity where you can actually understand from the start We already know we have differences of opinion. You're confused. You don't seem to understand where they come from, or else you would realize that it's going to be the similar kind of epistemological differences that we've already had. Unless you have changed or you're proposing that I have changed, it's not only predictable, but we've been through it before, but you didn't hear about it. But I'm supposed to believe that Gary's specific thing about double slit was only ever which way for 7 years or whatever. Yeah, I don't think so. That might be how you guys, remember it, but then your guys' understanding of science is totally whack. You expect it to fit your sense of what ought to be. Okay, well, welcome. That's how they did it. They got up really far in the 1800s doing it that way. Hopefully you'll make it to the 1900s eventually. But no, I'm not really that interested in this way of discussing things. You take offense over things and then make a big point of them and then act like you're the one that's above that. And frankly, you didn't understand the role that saying you could define a circle with words, and the fact that there's no rendition for it doesn't mean it's ill-defined, doesn't mean it can't be, and that it's still spatial because of the way you have to define it, and you don't get how that relates to what we were talking about, then I don't really think that you're able to keep up your end of the conversation. So, I think I'm done with this. Not that I won't watch your replies, I'm just thinking, I'm not going to bother. It takes time. I got to pay attention to it. I don't do anything else, so I can take notes. And you're just too stubborn to. You just are confused. You're just continually confused that your position somehow can't be agreed to as a premise of the argument. Yeah, I wonder.